Thanks for tuning in to your daily dose of quick real estate updates, local housing trends, and market data, plus tips, tools, and strategies to help you buy, rent, or invest with confidence. You're now getting ready with RealiCare Reports, powered by the innovation team, Cami and Rex. Now go grab your favorite morning breakfast, coffee or tea, and let's enjoy today's episode.
Imagine a legislative session just dragging on.
Yeah.
And on. Weeks longer than it was supposed to.
Yeah, that's exactly what just happened down in Florida.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are really getting into the weeds of the Florida legislative session that just wrapped up for 2025.
And our mission really is to unpack the big financial decisions, some key new laws, maybe even a bit of the behind-the-scenes stuff.
All to help you understand what this, massive $115.1 billion state budget and the new legislation actually mean, for businesses, homeowners, the environment there in Florida.
Right. And to do that, we're looking at a couple of main sources. We've got an email from the Florida Realtors that gives us a good breakdown of specific wins and budget details, especially related to housing and business.
Okay.
And then there's a detailed news report from FOX 13 Tampa Bay using info from the News Service of Florida. That gives us the bigger picture, the final budget numbers, and sort of the political interplay.
Got it. Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the session itself because, wow, it was a marathon.
It really was.
It finally ended, declared Sindai, which means, concluded indefinitely late Monday night, June 16th, like 11:19 p.m.
So late. And that's, more than 6 weeks past the original May 2nd end date?
Exactly. 6 weeks. The session started way back on March 4th, so clearly they hit some major snags.
They absolutely did. And the main reason for that huge delay was sorting out the budget. Big differences between the House and the Senate on spending.
The usual suspects.
Pretty much. They had to keep negotiating to find, common ground. And in the end, they did approve a budget Senate Bill 2500. It's $115.1 billion for the fiscal year starting July 1st.
Okay, $115.1 billion. That's obviously a huge number. But how does it compare? I heard it's actually smaller than the current budget.
It is, yeah, about $3.5 billion smaller than the current fiscal year's budget. And interestingly, it's also a bit less than Governor DeSantis's initial ask back in February, which was around $115.6 billion.
So what does that reduction tell us? A smaller budget this time around?
Well, it points towards a focus on maybe fiscal restraint, or at least a shift after years where federal COVID money really boosted state spending.
Right.
The Senate especially talked about normalizing revenues, getting back to sort of a baseline. It suggests some tough negotiations and maybe a push for efficiencies rather than just spending more.
And how did the final vote shake out? Was it contentious?
Interestingly, the Senate passed it unanimously, which is pretty remarkable for a budget this big.
Wow, unanimous.
But the House, that was a different story. It passed 103-2.
Okay, 2 no votes. Who were they, and what does that signal?
The dissenting votes came from Representative Angie Nixon, a Democrat from Jacksonville, and Representative Dodie Joseph, also a Democrat from North Miami. While most Democrats ended up voting for it, those no votes and comments from others kind of highlight this feeling that maybe focusing so much on, budget trimming and the House-Senate disagreements meant other things got pushed aside.
Yeah, we definitely saw those mixed reactions. Senator Ileana Garcia, a Republican, called the plan lean yet strategic.
Yeah.
Seems positive.
Right.
But then you had Representative Anna Eskamani, a Democrat, who voted for it but still called it a lot of missed opportunities.
Yeah, she mentioned, quote, so much time spent on conflict and controversy that a lot of issues that would benefit working families got left behind.
So those contrasting takes really show the tension, don't they?
Yeah.
Fiscal prudence versus maybe unmet needs.
Absolutely. It's that classic legislative balancing act. One side emphasizes responsible spending, building reserves, especially after that federal money influx. The other side worries about, the immediate impact on working people, social programs, stuff like that.
Makes sense. Okay, so despite those tensions, some significant things did get done, especially on the tax and housing front. Let's talk about the business rent tax. That's gone now.
Completely gone. This was a huge win for business groups. They've lobbied against this for, decades. House Bill 7031 eliminates it entirely.
And just to be clear, what was the business rent tax?
It was a sales tax specifically levied on commercial leases. Renting office space, retail space, warehouses, businesses paid sales tax on that rent. And Florida was, believe it or not, the only state in the country doing that.
Wow, the only one. So getting rid of it is a big deal for competitiveness.
Absolutely. It's estimated to save businesses somewhere between $900 million dollars and $904 million a year. That's significant relief. It covers both the state rate and any local add-on taxes.
And when does that take effect?
That kicks in October 1st, 2025.
Okay, so businesses get a break. What about homeowners? I saw something about the Hometown Heroes program getting more money.
Yes, that's right. The Hometown Heroes housing program, which helps certain frontline workers and other professionals with down payments for their first home, it got another $50 million boost in the budget, Senate Bill 2500.
That program's been really popular, hasn't it?
Very popular. Though, one note, the sources mentioned that certain occupation restrictions have been added to this funding. We'll need to see the specifics on that.
Ah, okay. Good to know. And that funding starts when?
That becomes available July 1st, 2025, so pretty soon.
All right. And staying with housing, especially with storm season and insurance costs always being top of mind in Florida, what about help for homeowners to harden their homes?
Yeah, good point. The MySafe Florida Home Program, which helps homeowners with grants for things like impact windows and roof upgrades, got a big infusion, $280 million in new funding in the budget.
That's substantial.
It is. And there's also help for condo owners. The MySafe Florida condominium program didn't get new money, but they reappropriated $30 million from last year. The key thing there is that condo associations that were already approved for grants can now actually get that money.
Okay, so making good on previous commitments for the condo side. Both of those should help with storm resilience and, hopefully, insurance costs down the line.
That's the goal, yeah. Help mitigate damage and maybe make properties more insurable or less costly to insure.
And beyond those specific programs, what about broader affordable housing efforts? Was there funding for that?
Yes, definitely. The budget, SB 2500, again, puts $385 million into the state and local government housing trust funds.
Okay, $385 million. How does that break down?
It's split between two main programs. About $164 million goes to the State Housing Initiatives Partnership, or HHHP. That's mostly for local programs helping individuals with down payments and closing costs.
Got it.
And the other, roughly $221 million goes to the State Apartment Incentive Loan Program sale. That one helps finance the construction of affordable rental housing.
So tackling both ownership and rental affordability. When does that money flow?
That also starts July 1st, 2025.
Okay, so lots happening on the housing front. What about other big investments? Environment is always huge in Florida.
Absolutely, and they continued the trend of significant environmental funding. The legislature allocated over $1.5 billion specifically for Everglades restoration and general water quality initiatives.
Over $1.5 billion. That sounds like a continued major priority.
It really signals that even with budget tightening elsewhere, protecting the environment remains critical. Within that $1.5 billion, you've got $691.5 million specifically for Everglades restoration. That's about the same as the current year.
Okay.
Then there's $675.2 million for various water improvement projects across the state and $170 million for flood and sea level rise grants.
Important stuff. Any other specific projects mentioned?
Yeah, the Realtor email highlighted a few. $60 million for the C-51 reservoir, $20 million for Biscayne Bay cleanup efforts, and $102 million for the Indian River Lagoon.
So targeted investments too.
Yep.
And that's all effective July 1st.
Correct, July 1st.
Now, besides spending, there was a really interesting move related to saving money, right? Building up the state's reserves.
Yes, a very proactive step. There's a plan. It's House Joint Resolution 5019 that will actually go to voters on the ballot in 2026.
Okay, well, we'll ask voters.
It asks them to approve raising the maximum limit for the state's main rainy day fund, the Budget Stabilization Fund. Right now, the cap is 10% of general revenue. This would raise it to 25%.
25%. That's a massive increase in the potential reserve.
It's huge. And they aren't just waiting for the vote. The plan includes setting aside $750 million in each of the next 2 fiscal years specifically for this, anticipating that voters will approve it.
So banking the money now. What's the reasoning for such a big cushion?
Well, House Speaker Daniel Perez explained it as helping future lawmakers handle major disasters or economic downturns without having to make drastic cuts or raise taxes suddenly. He basically said it saves money that, quote, could have very easily been spent on a bunch of pork.
Right, building resilience for the unexpected. Hurricanes, recessions.
Exactly. A much bigger safety net for the state's finances.
And along with saving for the future, they're also tackling existing debt.
They are. The budget includes $580 million specifically allocated to pay down state debt faster than required. And there's also a separate bill, House Bill 5017, that mandates an annual repayment of $250 million towards state bonds, above and beyond the minimums.
So a double focus. Save more, pay down debt faster. Sounds like a very fiscally conservative approach overall.
It definitely reinforces that theme, yes. Prioritizing long-term financial health.
Okay, let's circle back to that big tax package, HEB 7031. We talked about the business rent tax elimination, which was the headliner, about $900 million of the $1.3 billion total package. What else was in there?
Quite a few other things, some familiar, some slightly tweaked. A big one is making the back-to-school sales tax holiday permanent.
Oh, interesting. So families can count on that every August now.
Exactly. No more needing annual legislative approval. It covers clothes, school supplies, personal computers, the usual stuff. That's now a recurring thing.
That's helpful for planning. What else?
There are also the sales tax exemptions for hurricane preparedness. Applies things like batteries, portable generators, radios.
Always crucial in Florida.
And then a whole list of other items get exemptions: sunscreen, insect repellent, even tickets to NASCAR championship races. Also, fire extinguishers, smoke detectors, life jackets, bike helmets, and admission to state parks.
Wow, quite a mix. Seems like a little something for everyone in there, from safety items to recreation.
Yeah, it's a broad package aimed at providing various forms of relief and encouraging certain activities or purchases.
And it wasn't all just tax cuts and spending on programs. What about state employees? Did they see anything in this budget?
Yes, most state employees are set to receive a 2% pay raise. There are bigger boosts specifically for state law enforcement officers and firefighters. They're looking at additional raises between 8 and 13%, depending on the role, trying to address recruitment and retention there, presumably.
Makes sense. And education funding, K-12 schools.
Education saw an increase, too. Per student funding is going up by about 1.59%. It goes from roughly $8,988 per student to about $9,130.
Okay, so a modest increase there for schools.
Yes, keeping pace, essentially.
All right, now let's pull back that curtain you mentioned earlier, the politics behind all this. We know the session went long because of budget disagreements, but there were also reports of, let's say, friction between the House Speaker, Daniel Perez, and Governor DeSantis.
Yes, those dynamics were definitely part of the story this year and likely contributed to the extended timeline. There were clear policy differences.
Like what?
Well, for example, the House really pushed for a cut to the state's overall sales tax rate. That was a big priority for Speaker Perez.
Okay, a broad cut.
Right. Meanwhile, Governor DeSantis had floated the idea of property tax rebates for homeowners.
And did either of those happen?
Nope. Neither of those major proposals made it into the final package, which kind of shows the push and pull.
Interesting.
Speaker Perez actually said the House aimed to be, quote, a co-equal branch of government, have an opinion that matters, an opinion of value. You definitely got the sense the legislature was asserting its own priorities this session.
So the House flexing its muscles a bit.
You could say that, yeah. And on the Senate side, Senate President Ben Alberton framed their focus differently. He talked about normalizing the revenues after the COVID money, emphasizing government efficiencies and fiscal responsibility.
So different priorities between the chambers, and maybe between the legislature and the governor's office, too.
Seems that way. And it sounds like cutting property taxes is still on the agenda, but they're kicking that can down the road to the 2026 session.
Okay, so maybe more debates on that next year. The budget we got is really the result of all these compromises.
Exactly, a balancing act. And it sets the stage for future debates, for sure.
Now, speaking of debates, there was one specific bill, an implementing bill, SB 2502, that apparently got pretty heated. What was that about?
Right, that one stirred things up. The controversial part was a provision that could allow the Governor's Office of Policy and Budget, so the executive branch, to review the budgets of local governments, cities and counties.
Ah, state oversight of local budgets. I can see why that would be controversial.
Definitely. Critics like Democratic Senator Carlos Guillermo Smith raised concerns about state overreach. He questioned, somewhat colorfully, if the governor would, quote, send a bunch of 20-year-old bros to scrutinize local finances without understanding local needs.
Strong words. Was there support for it, too?
There was even some bipartisan support, interestingly. Senator Jason Pizzo, who's listed as no party affiliation, actually backed it.
Oh, why?
He argued he's seen local governments in his district, and I'm quoting here, blowing untold amounts of money on really stupid things, on trips all over the world, on productions and shows.
Okay, so he saw it as a needed check on wasteful spending at the local level.
Precisely. So you have that tension. state oversight versus local control, fiscal accountability versus potential intrusion. It really captures a core debate in state governance.
Yeah, that's a tricky balance. And one last point on potential conflicts. Did the legislature address concerns about possible federal funding cuts coming down the pike? Things like food stamps or Medicaid.
Democrats did raise those concerns during the debates, asking how potential federal cuts might impact Floridians and the state budget.
And what was the official response?
The legislative leadership's response was essentially, we'll deal with it if and when it happens. They said the current budget doesn't account for those potential cuts yet, and they'll address any impact when it gets here.
So a wait-and-see approach on that front could mean adjustments are needed later if those federal cuts materialize?
It could, yes. Might require budget amendments or even a special session down the road, depending on the scale.
All right, so wrapping this all up.
Yeah.
What's the big picture for you, our listener? This deep dive into Florida's, marathon legislative session and its $115.1 billion budget shows a real focus on certain areas.
Yeah, you see significant tax relief, especially the business rent tax elimination. You see continued substantial investment in housing programs and environmental protection.
And a very clear push towards fiscal conservatism, right? Paying down debt, planning to massively increase those rainy day reserves, all shaped by those extended negotiations and political dynamics.
Definitely. So here's something to think about. With these moves to normalize spending after the federal money and this really ambitious plan to boost reserves so dramatically, what does this budget really tell us about Florida's long-term financial game plan? How might these choices affect the state's ability to handle future shocks, whether economic downturns or, more intense climate events? Will it make Florida more resilient, or could it create new challenges down the road? Something to mull over.
Well, that wraps up today's episode of RealiCare Reports, where real estate meets real life. For more updates, tools, and insights that will help you buy, rent, or invest with confidence, be sure to follow, subscribe, stay connected, stay informed, and stay ready. Until next time.